Here we go. Peace. Assalam. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom. Peace unto you. What that means is we want to bring some peace here today. That's my word for today. And I'm Rev Bruce. And what we have today is the kickoff for our whole thing of Coffee and Chat with Rev Bruce. And so that's my word for today. That's my locked in piece right here today. But I definitely want you to think about a word that you can focus on. Think about something where you can get inspired. That's what this whole thing is about, being inspired. And so we're bringing on a guest today that I hope can give you inspiration, get you excited, get you encouraged to do the things that you feel driven to do, the things you haven't been motivated to move on, to get you from being a dreamer to a doer. That's what we're trying to do. We want to be getting to the point where it's a better you and you're having a better day. So let's start with a better day so we can get to a better you. Listen, my guest today is Mr. Viet Mai, and I've known Viet for some time. He is not only an educator, but he's also an artist, and most of all, he's an entrepreneur. Most of us need to find that space where we can be multiple things, and I definitely want him to share some of the things that he's doing in the San Diego area, in the art world, and in the world of entrepreneurship. So, without further ado, I want to bring up, for me and you, Mr. Viet Mai. Good morning, Viet. You got to unmute yourself.
Good morning, Bruce. Sorry about that. Yeah.
It's all good, man. All about the technology. Yes, good morning.
Good to be here.
As I was sharing, all right. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Let the people know from your own voice, what would you have to share about yourself?
My name is Viet Mai. I was born and raised in San Diego. Product of the public school system here. Grew up in Sierra Mesa. Went to Kearney High School, Taft Middle School. Then found myself going to college at UC San Diego. Math, computer science major. And then from there, I decided that computer science wasn't my thing. I was working in education when I was going to my undergrad, and I just fell in love with the work, working with young people, learning about the achievement gaps, and probably about 20 years later now, we still have achievement gaps. So that's what I'm still helping to help solve, and working with Mr. Bruce has kind of jump started and set the foundation for my journey.
Well, we got job security with the achievement gap, so that's we're going to keep tackling that. So listen, man, I'm curious. My word for today was peace. Is there a word that you have that has you rooted and locked in for today?
Yes, one of my favorite words is empathy, and I think people misconstrue that word, or they use it a little loosely, and I kind of want to emphasize that it really is about trying to remove your own judgment and putting yourself in someone else's perspective. Oftentimes we will always want to argue our own perspectives, and we know what we feel is right, but a lot of times that doesn't allow us to listen to the other side. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the things that are going on right now, I think we need to have more compassion for one another, and just kind of be patient with one another as we try to get on the same page and move towards a better future.
All right, I can deal with that. Listen, you mentioned before, that we've done some work together. Can you give a little more perspective on how that came about?
Man, I you know graduating from college, that last semester or last quarter is one of the most scary things, man. Because you're forced to make a decision
Mm-hmm.
where you don't have a curriculum to follow, and no one's going to tell you what your next move is. So I was struggling with what my future was going to be, and I applied for several computer science jobs, and I just something didn't stick. So as I was also looking for employment in education, I found the opening at Baby Charities with the 6 to 6 program there, and Mr. Bruce here, Reverend Bruce, was the uh, program director, and uh, I, I had probably the best interview that I've ever had in my life. It just felt real cool, casual. And one thing that struck me is that, after the interview, he said, "I'm not going to give you this job. you told me, you told me I'm not going to give you this job. I'm gonna make another position for you." And so I became a math and technology instructor. And what that allowed me to do was create, uh, really innovative curriculum for grades K through 6.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, for you to give me that creativity, that space for creativity. um, it just out the gate, it unlocked a lot from me to step up and really hone in on what the needs were for the kids at Nubia. And I always looked for innovative things that I can always do in the classroom and even in the community as an educator and a mentor with the various other programs that I had worked with.
Well, that's cool, man. I definitely am glad that you recall the shift that we made in order to create that position, and it worked out. I'll say that without a doubt. It worked out because not only did I see you with the ability to work the numbers and some of the technology, but then we're having a talent show and I come across you busting rhymes and hitting the whole you know body movements and pop locking. I was like, is this the math teacher? Man, tell me about that, man. What how do you have that? What's your inspiration for that, and how does it lead to you going in so many different directions? Because I wouldn't have thought that was the math teacher.
Yeah, yeah, thank you for bringing that up. Man, this is why I continue to be an educator, because most of my life, up until college and even in through college, I never thought I had a creative bone in my body. Like, I was told that I was supposed to be some kind of a engineer or a doctor or a scientist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Always math and science oriented, and I think a lot has to do with how we socialize our young people, based
Mm.
on ethnicity, gender,
Mm.
uh, background, right?
Okay.
And so when I learned about spoken word poetry in college, it was a medium that spoke to me, and I was even just experimenting with writing rhymes like hip hop and rap
Mm-hmm.
music. And as I learned more about hip hop culture, from the history to really the critical lens, I was fortunate to be able to take some hip hop classes, like the history of hip hop, critical thinking,
Mm.
and I I realized that not everyone gets to go to college to find that, unlock those depths of themselves. And so
Yeah.
because I had the opportunity to really find a different part of me that was never encouraged when I was growing up, I ran with it. And
Mm.
so I just had a good time, being expressive and being creative and sharing that work and sharing that movement of celebration, right, with the young people.
Yeah.
And it really shifted the way I looked at myself as an educator, because it wasn't just the subject content that I was trying to convey. I was actually trying to connect and build relationships with not only my coworkers, but the students that we were serving. So part
Hmm.
of building those healthy relationships is to connect on a more human level, and that's all about
Yeah.
culture, tradition, and arts.
So let me take you down a rabbit hole for 1 second then. In
Sure.
what you're saying there, you're trying to get students to not just see you as someone in front of the class who's handing out assignments. You're someone who also has, dynamic and comprehensive layers as another human being.
I wish I could say it was that obvious and common sense. However, there's such a disconnect by how we operate as colleagues, as coworkers, as students and teachers. Like I don't know what it is, but a lot of people tend to miss that human component when they're in a
Hmm.
workplace. Um, and and I've always wanted to have like deeper relationships with people, and somehow we've gotten to a place where it was keep your work and your private life separate. And for me, most of my
Work
life,
life balance. Work life balance, basically.
well, they say work life balance, but to me, it's all integrated.
Yeah, because you
My
bring who
work
you
and
are
my
to work.
yeah yeah. So
And
that's
if I can say this for you, man, I appreciated, and I'll let you go on, but I appreciated that you did bring who you are, and that was the idea of giving you the freedom to have a platform for there. And so I would be remiss if I didn't tell you that I appreciate that. That's what you did. You brought who you were. You didn't try to say, well, let me reshape it for I'm going to Southeast. Let me reshape it for these black folks. You just brought who you were, and I appreciate that, man. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry
it
about
was
that.
just an honor. No, you're good. Um, it was an honor for me to definitely be myself as I was in that moment. But also I learned a lot right through the process because I'm not from Southeast. I never lived in Southeast, and I've worked there. I
Hmm.
started off at Gompers when I was in my undergrad. Right, that was one of my sites that I tutored at, and so the other site was San Diego High School. So I got to learn. Um, I admit, like I'm an Asian American male, and I have that privilege of being looked at as smart all my life, right? And that's a
Mm.
stereotype. There were times where I didn't feel smart, so I wanna be here to also debunk the model minority myth that tends to put me against my black and brown peers. And
Definitely,
so,
definitely.
well, yeah, and growing up, I saw it, and I always kind of it always rubbed me the wrong way. And then now, fast forward when I became an educator, I started learning about the injustices. I started learning about the educational gaps, and it really opened my eyes to how uneven the playing field actually is. So through my journey, I continue to dig deeper and ask the harder questions and really get to know the communities that I serve. And you being my first boss and mentor for all these years, I feel like you've given me really good insights on what it means, to live in Southeast, or what it means to be a leader in the community. And so I never took that lightly. I still continue to uh, kind of practice by what those teachings.
Amen, man. Yeah. Now I'm gonna bring you on a whole nother loop now. I read in your bio, you got these two terms, edutainment and artivism. Can you go deeper with? I know edutainment from BDP and KRS-One and a whole hip hop background, but can you give me some background and insight into how that combines with artivism and what artivism is?
Sure. I grew up, I grew up as a U.S. citizen, right? And I, all my life, I felt like I was American. And every now and then I'm getting reminded that, oh, but you're Asian American, you're Vietnamese, you're hyphenated American. But I never, really subscribed to that, because I thought it was just American. And so I grew up on hip hop, right? And I think all young people growing up in America, they're going to be shaped by some sort of a culture, pop
Mm-hmm.
culture, whether it be hip hop or punk rock or um, you know whatever it is their family celebrates, or how
Mm-hmm.
they celebrate culture and art. And for me, hip hop was it. However, we all know, if we're going to be critical, hip hop can be pretty superficial. You have all the critical the criticisms, right? Typical
Mm-hmm.
criticisms.
The
Um,
Ebonics, you know.
yeah. So when I really got into hip hop and started learning about social justice, it opened up my world to artists like Common, Black Eyed Peas, uh, Black Star, Mos Def, Talib Kweli, um,
Yes.
and it really unlocked this like, oh my gosh, like this is so powerful, and it became the edutainment that I received. And I didn't really learn about that word until I met Teresa Fox, and she
Yes.
was an organizer, and to say
Yes.
the least, among other things. And she used to be the talent uh, director for the Encanto Street Fair. So
Yeah.
there was a
Yeah. Pay
call
homage,
out.
brother. Pay homage. Pay homage.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this Encanto Street Fair was actually one of my first public performances as a poet, and I was just probably 1 or 2 years I've been writing spoken word poetry. And for her to, I won't forget, it was at this place called the Yo Spot, where
Yep.
we had our first community meeting. It was on Market
What you
Street.
know about that?
Yeah, so I had definitely been at the Yo Spot for some work, as an undergrad. And that's how I was in tune, and I get these announcements. And so when I met Teresa, she just really emphasized this, like, art as a form of activism.
Mm.
And I just loved it. And so as the more I became an artist, the more I saw that a lot of the messages were about social change. So as an educator in specializing in math, because that's actually what I was hired for my next two jobs, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so I started to apply the same concept of let the students get to know you. And so I
Yeah.
would share my poetry during, like, lunch hour or lunch breaks.
Mm-hmm.
We would have ciphers in my office, and it just became, a good selling point, right, for me and the students to really engage on something that we can connect on a common level. And so
Yes.
hip hop, to me, has always been about that, like, culture and community. It's always represented the struggle and the triumph, right? So
Yeah.
there, when I say hip hop, it is really a whole culture that has so much um, depth and
Mm-hmm.
breadth. And so a lot of people will just kind of stop at the violence and the misogyny, but
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we have to acknowledge. I think Tupac probably put it best when he had an interview, and he said, I'm gonna say thug life because I'm trying to show people that this is what it's like in America, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the hood, right? Like, and he referred back to the Vietnam era, the Vietnam War era when television was new then. And so when people started seeing war in their living rooms, they said, make it stop. They
Yeah.
said, we have to stop this. And so he said, I'm gonna push thug life until somebody says stop. And so that was just so powerful to me. And my job is to, as a poet, is to use the power of a metaphor to bring ideas and thoughts together, and to make those parallels and make those connections, so people
Yeah.
see a problem, but they can also see how it might relate in their own personal lives.
So you've got the artistry, you've got the edutainment, but then you're also doing this thing as an entrepreneur, and you're working with this social innovation. You got a master's in it as well, right?
Yeah, I did. I got burnt out, man. Working in the education system,
Mm-hmm.
for all those who are working in the education system, I bet so many people can co-sign with me when I say it is one of the most frustrating yet rewarding places to work at the same time, because you're doing good work. You're there to
Mm-hmm.
serve young people. And yet you also can feel like you are trapped in
Mm.
a system that does not support you.
Mm.
And because of the bureaucracy, because of the red tape, because of accountability, um, the bottom line for schools is attendance and test scores. And what's very interesting is a lot of times the two and two don't even correlate, but yet
No.
those are the two main factors. So I was able to go from being a instructor, a math specialist, to a data specialist. So then I started working in admin.
Mm-hmm.
So I was in charge of data and attendance. I did policy. I did accountability reports. And so I dealt with all the numbers and the statistics. And I will say, man, those numbers don't change. I feel like I wrote in a piece that I felt like I was the devil's accountant, just ensuring like, okay, injustice is still intact. Like, so I got to that point.
They do say the devil is in the details. Don't get me wrong.
Man, I can't say how true that is, man. Um, and so I hit this wall.
All right.
I became an entrepreneur as I saw my talent as an artist, as a poet, started taking off. I was involved with a group called Collective Purpose, and we
Yeah.
did a
Yeah.
open mic called Elevated for 10 years, 11
Yes.
years, and it was probably my claim to fame. It
Yeah.
was a math poem, and be it my involvement with Elevated, and just being somebody who opened up a space. Was part of a team that opened up a space for the community. And San Diego
Okay.
Poetry now is popping. So if you want to learn more about it, definitely find me on Facebook. There's actually an Elevated page that you can look up, and it lists some of the open mics that are currently happening. And I I noticed that there was money in it. There was every now and then I'd get a paid gig, so it's like
Yeah.
cool. That's rewarding. That's kind of a next step in things. But I didn't know how to be a full time artist, so I took what I knew as an educator, and I started doing workshops.
Mm.
Poetry workshops. I did motivational speaking gigs. I was hired by several youth programs that continue to hire me every year for their camps, for their conferences. Um, San Diego County Office of Education hired me to do one of their achievement gap forums. So it was really cool. Like I got to be on stage and share my art and insights as an educator. And I've gotten awards for literacy, for teaching
Okay.
literacy. So I share that because I had to take a remedial writing class in my first quarter at UC San Diego. I could not enroll in a regular writing class until I learned how to write a 5 paragraph essay correctly.
Give somebody some hope with that, because I remember my first semester at Morehouse, being an avid reader and them putting me in a remedial reading class. I said, well, I
It's
graduated. Wait a minute, I graduated real well. The GPA says it, and I read all the time. I'm not a good reader,
right, right, right.
because the
And
remedial is the wake up call. right?
It is. It is
All
because
right.
it made me feel some kind of way,
Yeah.
and it didn't help. It didn't help the upbringing, and um, being basically told that I was only good at math and science, and that was my lane. So, I'm sharing that here for whoever's listening to say like people will tell you things, and it may not even be true, and
Mm.
so you really
Help
have to
somebody
kind of dig
out.
in and do that exploration, right? Like you got to do
Yeah.
that self exploration. So
Yeah.
for
Help
me,
somebody out with that.
yeah, I hit that wall and I said, you know what? I found out about this master's program at the University of San Diego. They
Okay.
they advertised on Facebook, and so it was a new program. I've never seen it before. It said Masters in Social Innovation, and I said, what is this? And I looked at the description, and essentially it said, do you want to change the world?
Mm.
Learn how to create sustainable models of change. And I said, all right, I think I found my program. And that's 14 years after I graduated with my bachelor's.
All right.
So I'm also here to say you don't have to plow through education. I think there's a lot of learning that needs to happen in the real world for you to really find out where your heart wants to go, where your heart is going to take you. Um, we don't know enough by 25 years old. I
Mm.
think you have to get to 30. You have to get to 35. And then finally you're kind of like, yo, I think I'm pretty clear on what I'm supposed to do in this world. And so I want to say 36 at the time, when I entered and I applied for the master's program, and it was a 10-month program. So fortunately that worked out for me because it kicked my ass, man. Like grad school is no joke.
So wait a
Um,
minute, Viet. Wait a minute. You mean to tell me first you come on here and you almost bash the education system itself, right? And now you said now for higher ed, you're saying, wait a minute, man, you don't even need to sign up for a master's immediately. You need to go out and discover the world and discover yourself before
I
jumping in that.
I
Is
think
that
so. Some people know
okay?
what they want to do. I mean, everyone is going to be different.
Yeah.
Um, my aunt who is like 80 something years old, she went back to school. She's retired and she went back to get her bachelor's.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm proud of her, and that's the kind of example that shows like you can live a full life and not feel pressured into getting a degree. And you do it for your own self fulfillment. You know, if if I had a chance, did I have any regrets about going back to school other than the student debt? No, right? Like so
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people would be like, well, I don't want to be in debt, and I get that, right?
Yeah.
And for me, I chose to do it because I literally hit a wall, like not literally, but I was really in a hole, uh,
Yeah.
emotionally, mentally, motivationally. And so I needed to figure out, the question I went into it was, what is the social innovation that needs to happen in education?
Mm.
And, or rather for education. And so what I realized and I kind of confirmed is that, my solution isn't in the educational system. Just like I was saying, we have to learn things in the real world. Well, that was the key. I am working on a concept or a platform to basically activate the education in the community, user to user learning. I learned a lot from the people that I served with in the community through
So is that
outreach.
where? Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, the so through my program, master's program, we our part of our fulfillment was to do a capstone project,
Mm-hmm.
and that was kind of an open-ended concept. We could start a business. We could enter the Global Social Innovation Challenge. You could do a research project, and I said, when I came in here to figure out how to start a business. And so I said, you know what? Let me do the research. Let me put together a solid business model, as a business plan. And I learned a lot about the startup world, and that's kind of the world that I'm in right now. So I created a concept and co-created, anyways. I have a partner, and we came up with Vinci. So Vinci.net, VINCII.
So I've got Vinci up right now. Let me go ahead and share that with the people. Right, you keep talking, Viet. Go ahead.
Sure. So Vinci is an online portal for community education. And the goal is to basically activate the teaching and learning that can happen in the community. I mean, we do workshops all the time. We go to Eventbrite, we go to Facebook events, but there's no real portal that can get you directly to just strictly education. Everything is just so um, what's the word, saturated with various events, whether they be parties or fundraisers or sometimes workshops, sometimes they're game nights, sometimes they're networking events. We wanted to create a portal that was focused only on education. um, as you can see in the title, we do it for people, we do it for businesses, we do it for nonprofits. So I've helped come up with a model that I feel like helps build a educational ecosystem that isn't dependent on bureaucracy. I consider it democratizing education, and a lot of those concepts come from my research and my learnings when about the history of education. And so I'm hoping to create a model that everyday people like you and I can offer workshops about our own expertise, and people can actually learn and build a curriculum of their own based on whatever they want to do in their life, and they can put together a curriculum based on community educators. So if you're someone who is an artist like me and you want to also start a business with your art, then where do you what college program is going to allow you to do that? You're either going to have to be an art major or you're going to have to be a business major. But in this kind of real world curriculum, we're allowing people to find the right educators and piece their game plan together. So they're going to learn from artists who are in business. They're going to learn from businesses who incorporate art. So it's just this more dynamic way of learning from each other rather than paying high tuitions and going into debt. And then there's the economic and the social barriers that go with higher ed and the education system in general. So
Yeah.
uh,
So
there's a
let
lot.
me let me toss this out. You mentioned the program at USD. Social innovation. I'm curious about this whole adaptive leadership and human centered design thinking that's incorporated with that. Can you tell me about that and give some people some insight into that, as well as how does that fit into your work with people?
Right. Sure. I learned both of those concepts in my graduate program, and I was introduced to adaptive leadership through my through Souls. I took so part of my program, we were able to take classes from different colleges, and for me, I was at the Kroc School of Peace Studies, but I was really, for the longest time, I wanted to do the nonprofit leadership program at Souls, School of Leadership and Education. That's what SOUL stands for. And so part of the social innovation program, we had an option to take a leadership class, and in there we use adaptive leadership as the framework. And adaptive leadership is basically saying that change and adaptive change happens from informal authority and formal authority. So it's acknowledging that, yes, we have traditional leaders, we have elected officials, we have CEOs, we have bosses, managers, um, right? Authority. And then you have your informal authority, who are your community leaders, the pastors, the OGs, even, right? Like the ones in the community that people look up to and have a voice, and people respect, and they have clout because of the way they operate, or the way they think, or how they communicate with people. What I realize is that I've been an informal authority most of my life, most of my career. So for me to put those words together, and really have an understanding of the framework, and it makes a point that everything that we get into has a language, just like the startup and the business community. There's human-centered design is kind of the framework for the startup world now. So if you want to start a business, you're going to learn about uh, rapid prototyping. You're going to learn about human-centered design or design thinking, right? These are some terms that you are going to encounter when you enter the startup world, or you go into circles that are about building a business. And so human-centered design is essentially is forget what you're trying to do for a minute, and just start asking questions for people. And when you start asking open-ended, broad questions like, what is a perfect day in your world? And what you do is you listen for the
Mm-hmm.
things that people, what work for them. And then you say, well, what would be uh, a least perfect world, right? Like, what would be a terrible day? And you start to listen about what their concerns are, what
Mm-hmm.
their needs are, and
So
what they
this is sort of like the old school canvas in the neighborhood listening campaign, but in a more formalized
yes,
setting.
yes, yes. It's
Okay.
more formalized. It is very bottom up rather than
Okay.
top down. A lot of times when people have a great idea, they want to create the idea and then sell it to people,
Yeah. Shove it.
and that is kind of backwards in the way the current uh, way of doing things in this startup world, because there's a lot of energy and resources that go into that top down model. Um,
Okay.
some people can have that kind of capital, and some people can build, a Tesla and assume that people are gonna buy it, and there's other people that can't afford to just spend millions of dollars on a prototype, and then hopefully it works out for them. So
But
most
it's good for the
people,
earth. Good for the earth.
right? So we as entrepreneurs or innovators are really challenged with getting to know the problem in very great detail. And after learning this concept of adaptive leadership and um, and human-centered design, I
Yeah.
realized I've been practicing this all of my career, right?
So let me ask you this. You've acquired this knowledge, right? And so in order to apply this knowledge, how does that work with the community groups that you're working with, that you've worked with in the past and even currently?
Man, learning never stops. So
Mm-hmm.
even after I graduated from USD with my master's, I still felt like I needed to learn so much more. I saw
Mm-hmm.
an opportunity with the Rise Urban Leadership Program,
Okay.
and
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it spoke to me like another. You open up your eyes, you open up your mind to what is possible, what is available, what is out there, and you really have to be in tune with these opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when I saw a lot of the people I knew going through this program called Rise Urban Leadership Program,
Mm-hmm.
and it became my turn to consider applying, of course, like that was the natural next move for me in my head, in my heart.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, all right, let me apply. When I looked at the application, it said we are going to use adaptive leadership
Mm-hmm.
as a lot of our framework. And I said, you know what? Let me write about that. It then became an opportunity for me to
Yeah.
continue practicing this concept of adaptive leadership.
They call
So
that a
for
fit. They call that a
it,
fit.
it fit like a glove, right?
Yes. All right.
And with my involvement with Rise, man, I learned so much about myself, and that's what kind of helped me become more confident in who I am in just the last 2 3 years.
Mm.
Because I will say, before 3 years ago, like 3 years ago, I was not in a great place at all. four
All
years
right.
ago, I was probably at my worst. I just hit a really dark place, and mental health is one of those things that I
Mm-hmm.
hope to address and not keep as a stigma. So I
Yeah.
dealt with depression. I found it really difficult to be motivated during that time. I found it really
Okay.
difficult to see value in myself. But through being in educational programs or being around people that are trying to improve themselves,
Yeah.
it was such a great space for me to be vulnerable, to be curious, to explore, right? And those
Yes.
are the spaces that we all need to look for. We all need to find in our lives one way or another. And if it can be through professionals, that is the key, because we can't do
Yeah.
these things on our own, and we need help from mentors.
So that's the perfect segue into my next question. How does this fit with Village of Promise?
Village of Promise is an organization that I worked with since it 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 opened up,
Okay.
2009, March of 2009. So we are in our 11th year. We've been working with middle and high school kids of incarcerated parents
Yeah.
out of the southeastern region, so 92114 area code, zip code, and that is our specific niche. The board had assembled and had done work as early as 2004, and they did some human centered design approaches. So they surveyed the community. They
Mm-hmm.
asked the people what it is that they wanted to see for the community. And at first, they did a mental health survey, and they did some programming. They got money from the California Endowment and among other, foundations, and they did a program for mental health. That's why their official 501c3 is Village of Promise Health Outreach. And
Mm-hmm.
then they got a second grant, and they surveyed the community, and the community said, we want more for our children.
Mm.
So they did their research, and they found a niche demographic that is hardly talked about. Some
Okay.
say they're considered the invisible children of America. And these are the children who have a parent in prison, a
Yeah.
parent that has been incarcerated. And that's not something that I've ever encountered in my years in the educational system. This is something that was brought to my attention through the youth organizations that I worked with and the community members, the leaders that were serving the young people. So, as Arlene Smith, she's the executive director,
Mm-hmm.
she saw me working with the Aaron Price Fellows Program, which is another youth program that I'm a part of, and she saw how I was working with the youth, and she invited me to really get to know the board first to see if I was a good fit, see if the board, was a fit for me. And I just really liked their message, and it so allowed me to dig deeper into a very vulnerable population, very challenging dynamic to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And yet I have had some of the most rewarding experiences and known some of the most brightest young people that I've ever met in my life, most resilient. We have somebody who is now in the Marines, and
Mm-hmm.
she is like a leader in the Marines. I think she graduated to like a sergeant recently. We have people that, got jobs through us because of our work training, and we work with them to protect their interviews. So we do a lot of hands-on work. We do workshops every weekend, once a weekend, and then a outing, some kind of a field trip,
Okay.
also in a month. And then we have a summer camp as well. It's a 5-day summer camp, which is I've been involved in summer camp ever since I was a freshman in high school, actually. So I
All
was
right.
either a camper or a camp counselor. And I'll tell you, man, those retreats are some of the most life-changing moments that one can ever experience. Not just as a student, but if you ever get a chance to work with young people in that setting, there's something about leaving your immediate area and just bonding with a group of people for about 3 to 5 days or 7 days. And
All right.
you just get that really deeper connection. People really open up, and they get to share stories that they never got to share with other people in their lives. And it creates a healing space, right? Where people can cry together, they can laugh together, and they can just enjoy, break bread, play with one another, right? Like play, we're missing a lot of that in our
Hmm.
education system, even in our adult life. The concept of play. Everything
Yeah.
has to be so serious and so professional and so like, you know, buttoned up, right? But
Yeah.
as you mentioned, you saw me dancing with the kids and during the talent show. It's just like that's what it's about. We wanna find ways to celebrate and
So let
not.
me ask you this, man. Since you bring that up, the engagement with the youth, the involvement with the youth, and bringing it all the way back to inspiration. How does this or does this not inspire you and build your confidence in passing the torch, the baton, to the generation behind you?
It always inspires me. I think as educators, we inherently have that, right? Like we want to teach the next generation to continue a good pattern for the rest of their
Yeah,
life.
but we
And
desire to, but I definitely I would definitely want to push you a little further. Is it, are you there where you feel that, oh, I can see these kids taking it and moving on?
I, you bring up a really good question because I can say yes for a lot of the students that I've worked with and that
Okay.
I continue to watch grow. A
Yeah.
lot of times they add me on Facebook or follow me on Instagram, and I get to see their success and I
Yeah.
celebrate that with them.
Yes.
I have students that I worked with 20 years ago that are now, um, have master's degrees. They're news anchors. They're working with young people, right?
Yes.
They're getting, they're giving back. And
Yes.
so, but I also have encountered a sense of, and I hate to say it, man, but I see a lot of disrespect for the older generations.
Hmm.
Somehow we've lost respect for our elders. Sometimes people see me as Mr. Viet, right? Like I have, you know, pages that say Mr. Viet. And I got that from you because when we were working at Nubia, you were Mr. Bruce.
Yeah.
Everyone was Miss somebody or Mr. somebody. And I loved that. And the reason why I stuck with it is because even in Vietnamese culture, we have titles. Titles are super important.
Hmm.
If we were to address even family members, my cousins, even if they're older than me, they still address me as An Viet, ANH,
Yes.
An, my middle name, right? So An Viet means, a respect. It's like older brother.
Hmm.
And for me, everyone has a title. So in the Vietnamese culture, everyone has a title. So depending on their status, and it's kind of a hierarchy thing. Um, I'm not a huge fan of hierarchy, but I am a huge fan of respect. And if
Amen.
that's the way I can show respect to people, then I'm going to refer to them as titles, right? With their appropriate titles. So if someone has a
Yeah.
PhD, it's Dr. So and so,
Yeah.
right? It is anyone that's my professor or educator. It's Professor so and so. Like, I have a hard time calling people by their first name, even if they insist on calling me by their first name. Then I'll say Professor. I have one Professor Karen, right? She was
Yeah.
my graduate advisor, and I referred to her as Professor Karen, and I still continue to do so, and I hope I continue to still do so.
So it's a matter of
So
respect for you.
it is a matter of respect, and I'm seeing, I the hashtag OK Boomer. I think it's hilarious, right? Like, I have a sense of humor. I get it. However, I'm afraid that is one of those things that is perpetuating this, like, you can't tell me nothing.
Yeah.
You're old school. You're outdated. You're irrelevant. And I don't like that. And I think it would be considered cancel culture in kind of today's speak. And I believe that everyone develops human capital. As they get older, they have human capital, whether they have a degree or they've worked 35 years in a workplace and they're retired, right?
Yeah.
So for me, human capital is something that we cannot let go of, right? We do have an issue with our economy and baby boomers. Baby boomers are not ready to retire financially because of the market crashes, right? So when I talk about, like, passing the torch, I'm trying to find ways for baby boomers to be able to teach workshops based on their expertise and what they've learned along the way,
Hmm.
so they don't have to just drive for Uber all for the rest of their retirement,
Yeah.
right? Like, that is a lot of Uber drivers are retired professionals. And I've talked to a Uber driver. He said, "What I really want to do is teach. I want to teach engineering." He was a senior engineer, and he said, "I want to teach." I said, "That is an amazing. It was just like, cool." And so he was one of the ones that inspired Vinci. And I said, well, I need to figure out how to make this happen. So I'm trying to build something that is user friendly. If you go on the site now, it's functional, but it requires some technical background in order to set up your profile and set up your
Yeah.
your workshops. But you can actually set up your workshop, put in your PayPal email, and we'll help you promote it. And then whatever the funds that, however you choose to price your workshop, um, you can get paid, right through PayPal. So that for me is about passing the torch. I realize that I can't teach everything, but I know that there are basic components of life that will help anybody become successful. Some foundational literacies, right? Everything is a language. So there are some foundational literacies that I put together to help reframe the way we think about education. So rather than math, science, history, uh, language arts, I'm thinking of things like financial literacy, health and wellness, social entrepreneurship, community
Yeah.
engagement, right? Those are those tenets that are going to help us thrive and be better as people, as a community, rather than
So,
the individual mindset that we're constantly trained that we got to do all this stuff by ourselves.
all right. All right. Yeah. So let me pull the brakes on this, man. We're coming down the last few minutes of this. Share with me in a 2 minute snapshot what is the most inspiring quote or term you've heard or come across that still keeps you going right now.
Um, I'm a big fan of Brené Brown. She had the famous TED talk about vulnerability, and in her follow-up TED talk, she brings up this concept, I may be paraphrasing, but she says, um, the opposite of fitting in is belonging. So rather than us trying to fit into or assimilate into a society, a standard, a status
Mhm.
quo, or norm, what I'm seeing now is that more and more people, our communities, are now building communities where they belong. So it's not
Wow.
about fitting in anymore. It's about finding the empowerment in your own circles to belong.
Amen. You know what, man? I truly appreciate that, man, and it's been a great talk. I I definitely will have you back some other time and hear some more about what you got going on, what you've added to this since then. Let me tell you something, man. From brother to brother, for me, it's been a pleasure to see your growth and development and you becoming more of a man who is well rounded and who is strengthening others with your own well roundedness. So, man, I appreciate it. And I look forward to, you having further success. We'll definitely, like I said, bring you back. It's been a pleasure. It's for me, it gives me a little bit more emphasis and hope to keep, reaching and teaching back. You know what I mean? And so,
Definitely.
as the ancestors said to me, I turn back like the Sankofa bird, even though I'm still moving my feet forward, and I pay homage to you. So, bless you, brother. I thank you. All right.
Thank you. Yeah, thank
All
you for
right.
having me. It's been an honor.
All right. Listen up, folks. We're about to wrap up. This has been a complete hour of success. Definitely check out Viet's website, both the vietmai.com website, you know what I mean, as well as his Vinci website. They both offer something that you can look into for those that are looking to get online, start your business. Check it out. This is what entrepreneurs do. They make themselves known. They market themselves. They share themselves. Listen, this is about you not just having a better day. This is about you becoming a better you. That's one thing I can say about this journey for where God's taken me. He's taken me from where I was to where I am, still to where I'm going. And so I'm better, but I've still got to continue to get better. I'm still in development. I'm still evolving. And so I want y'all to tag along with me. I want to tag along on your journey. This is what this is about. Giving hope to folks that might be ready to quit. Giving hope to people who are on the verge of a victory, but also might be on the verge of falling out. Hey, listen, this has been a great time. Remember, my word was peace, right? His was about empathy. Remember what he was talking about. Listen, there are things going on where you might be facing an unlevel playing field, but there are people out there like Viet who are trying to, level that thing up. Trust and believe. Someone else is definitely interested in what you got going on. This adaptive leadership, this human-centered design, it's all in place so that we can be better communities and build better communities. Hey, be empowered today. Be encouraged today. And definitely, most of all, have you a great day. Hey, this is not just me. This is for everybody. God bless.